Alright, welcome back to Poor Boy Printing. Today we want to cover filament. And filament's kind of like the gasoline for your vehicle, right? Same as gasoline for a car. You know, if you don't have it, you can't really go anywhere. But there's different grades, there's different qualities. You know, it just depends on what you're doing. So, kind of cover the three basics of filament, of the three different kinds that you're going to print most of everything out of. Usually you're going to do either PLA, PETG, or you're going to do ABS. There's a bunch of other flavors out there, different stuff, and there's different variations of PLA, there's different variations of PETG. I don't say PETG, I think it's stupid. And ABS. And you can go with ASA. We'll put ASA and ABS in the same category. But those are kind of your three kings. Those will get pretty much every project that you want done without really breaking the bank. Of course, you can go and do different stuff. Let's say, maybe you get to doing some really interesting projects. Maybe, you go for a carbon fiber nylon or a glass fiber nylon, whatever. But for most, 99% of what you're doing, those three filaments are going to cover the gambit of what you're doing, right? So we'll start out with PLA. This is the first spool I ever bought. I've just barely used it. It doesn't say on here, but this is actually Sunlu. This is Sunlu, I think, what's their Meta PLA. Print's great. Print's really cool if you look at the temperature on there, like 180 to 200. And honestly, PLA will cover, if you're making small projects, if you're doing whatever, it's fine. And I know people get really bent out of shape. Well, you can't really do anything with PLA, blah, 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 you can't do stuff. PLA is actually fairly strong. And PLA is actually, like, especially if you go to CNC Kitchen or anywhere else, look at the comparison of layer adhesion, the strength of layer adhesion for PLA versus everything else. It blows everything else out of the water. PLA has one of the best layer adhesions of almost any filament out there. I mean, it beats out nylon, it beats out PETG, it beats out everything else. It has one of the best. Now, PLA, you can build a lot of stuff out of it. It's fine. It's fine for your projects. It's fine for anything small, trinkets, or if you want to, do prototyping. I've used it for prototyping. I use it for wall hangers that don't use a lot of weight, because that is one thing you have to understand is you have what's known as creep. PLA has a fair amount of creep. And of course, PLA is a fairly low glass transition temperature, which is basically where that PLA is going to go and soften. So if you're going to put anything in your car, that PLA is not the best idea. Granted, a while back I had a Subaru and needed oil all the time. I printed out a oil funnel out of PLA. It lasted for like a year in my car. And now, granted, after a while it got kind of deformed, but I was putting that on a hot engine. It was fine. And I think, too, a lot of people don't understand that plastics do not conduct heat very well. It's not like metal where it's gonna, conduct heat very quickly. So even putting it on a hot engine that I was adding oil to was fine as well. So PLA is fine. If you need, higher end, more use, you can also go with a PLA Plus, especially if you're, printing some, let's say, airsoft parts. PLA Plus is always the go-to. Has a little bit higher of heat deflection. Well, not heat deflection, but the glass transition is a little bit higher. I think it's goes from 50 to 60 Celsius. PLA Plus is fine as well. Actually, this is an old roll PLA Plus I've used. But, there's different flavors, and I won't get too much into those different flavors on this video. But PLA and PLA Plus will cover a lot of things that you want to do. But I think most people graduate to PETG. And PETG is a really good middle ground between having a higher glass transition temperature and also having more flexibility than PLA. So I use that for a lot of functional parts. It works fine. There's a lot of people that act like it's super hard to print. I think those people just have a skill issue, because it is not hard to print at all. It prints as easy as PLA. I think there's just too many people that want to throw it on there and not do any tuning whatsoever. Because for every filament, you do need to sit there and do a little bit of tuning, especially if it's a, because like for instance, if you go with a PLA plus, it's going to string way more than a regular PLA, and you're going to have to change it around. As long as you sit there and just do a little bit of change, it's not hard. But PETG is honestly one of those things that I mostly print now, just because price-wise I can get it for almost the same or less than PLA, and it's like, well, why would I want to print PLA when I can just do everything PETG? It's kind of like that. Some people say it's hard to print, but I mean, there's a Benchy and some, I think this is Elegoo. There's a little bit of bumps on there because I pushed a little bit too fast, but perfect Benchy, looks great, overhangs are great. I will say overhangs are a little bit harder sometimes, just because your cooling does need to be less than PLA. PLA definitely, you run 100% cooling. PETG, you can run up to like 50% cooling is usually what I run. But PETG is going to have a much, not super high, but it's going to print at a much hotter temperature than PLA. So most PETG has a minimum of like usually about 230. This is some really good Sunlu PETG. This is their high speed, and it goes from 230 all the way up to 270, and that's that's another thing too you got to tune for is your print speed. Kind of play around with how fast you're printing it. But like I said, it's 230 to 240, low speed, and then you can go higher as you print faster. But PETG is one of those things that I found is, it's easy to print. It's something I can chuck in my car. I don't have to worry about that melting. It's not really. And I think people do get kind of bent out of shape about temperature. They go too far about it. And it's like, okay, your car's not getting to 200 degrees Fahrenheit in there. You're like, you're fine. But it is a really, what I would consider a very easy to print filament. And like, especially too, once you upgrade to a full model hot end, you can print it without an enclosure. You don't need a, all you need is, like, honestly, for an Ender 3, granted this one's upgraded with a sprite extruder, you don't need to sit there and do a bunch of stuff to print it. You don't need an enclosure. And it'll print just fine. One thing you have to worry about versus PLA is that PETG does have a moisture issue. It is very hygroscopic, not hydroscopic, hygroscopic, where it wants to absorb water pretty fast. And where I live in the Midwest, especially in the summer here, we get a stupid amount of humidity, and you will see a lot more stringing, and you will definitely see a lot more, you'll feel that popping even at the low temperature of like 230. And 250 you'll get a lot of popping, you'll get a really bad first layer. So that's something you need to kind of look at. But yeah, PETG is really good, and then you can also go with like a glass fiber PETG. It just all kind of depends on your application, right? Kind of the last one is ABS. This is some Polymaker ABS I got on a sale. This is their Polylite ABS. It prints great. One thing you do need with ABS is to print in an enclosure. It does print hotter, but you do have a much higher glass transition temperature than PLA or with PETG. So it's really great if you are working with something that is a much higher temperature. I don't use ABS a lot. It's a little bit more finicky than PLA and PETG, but it's not like, people act like it's like evil. There's too many people that want to just chuck it in there. They don't do any tuning. And they're like, oh, the prints are horrible. The prints are horrible, right? No. If you go and tune it, it's fine. And also, you can run fan with ABS. You do not have to sit there and just do a print with ABS with zero cooling. You can do up to, I've played around with up to 20-30% cooling in an enclosure. Works fine. That helps with the overhangs. The problem with ABS is that it doesn't like huge temperature swings. So that's why you can't print it. I think there's some, maybe you can, but usually you don't want to print it without an enclosure. It's one of those where it's like you need an enclosure, but as long as you have an enclosure, you're good to print it. It prints about as hot as PETG. I mean, you can, yeah, about 245 to 265. You can push it. Prints slower, but it works fine. I still think I think the reason why people hate it so much is there's still a lot of that older mentality back, way back in 3D printing when all you had was PLA and PETG. No, I'm sorry, PLA and ABS. And people were trying to print ABS on an unheated bed without an enclosure. And I think a lot of that still kind of carry over. And it's like, ABS is fine. I just don't use it a lot because I don't have a huge need for it. And it's more expensive than PETG. And PETG really, honestly, will cover most of your... It's easy to print, and it's going to cover most of your heat deflection issues for a project. Now with all of these, except for the PLA, is you need to usually either store your filament in a dry box, or you need a dryer. This is a filament dryer. This is a cheap one. I think it was like $45 from Creality. I like this one. It goes up to 65, and you know, it'll do up to like, I think it does up to like 24 hours at 65 degrees Celsius of drying. ABS and PETG, if you leave them out, especially in a place that gets humid, it will cause problems. It'll string more. It'll start to get more bubbling. You'll have a really bad first layer. You'll have kind of pops and skips and stuff. So dry it. That'll solve most of your issues. There's people that say, oh, you don't need a filament dryer. Just buy a filament dryer. Just do it. It's worth having. They're not expensive anymore. You can either buy a dedicated filament dryer, or if you can find one at Goodwill or you have an old one, just use a food dehydrator. Those work fantastic too. But yeah, anybody that says you don't need a dryer is lying to you and trying to sell you something. Because if you've ever looked at production of filament, look at how they cool the filament when it's extruded. It goes through water. And it's like, yes, they can dry it, but most of the time it's not getting dried to the same level that you would think, you know, maybe, so it's, you know, it's not going to be at 10 to 15% humidity in there. I've had spools of PLA that printed horribly. Actually, I'll grab that real quick. I had a spool, this is Overture, matte PLA. I had this for a project for my sister. It prints horribly. And whatever they put to make it matte absorbs water like no tomorrow. I had steam inside my dryer. So yeah, just having a dryer is just buy one. Don't listen to people that say you don't need a dryer. I would say the dryer is really needed, like if you have a PETG that's been sitting out for a long time. If you buy really cheap PETG, I found it usually has a little water in it. It's fine. Especially too if you have like a fiber reinforced filament, like a fiber reinforced PETG, it like immediately says to dry it, right? So I would say buy a dryer, and then also, so you don't have to keep drying your filament, is buy a dry box. So what you can do, here I'll show you an example. So this is just a sealed cereal box, and the bottom I have desiccant. And these are really cheap. They're really cheap to buy. I forget what company sells them on Amazon. If you want to buy them, don't buy them from a 3D printer company. There's a company that just makes them, and I think you can get 6 of them for like $24 to $28. They're really cheap. Perfectly fits a spool. You can turn them into a print dry box as well, but just for storage, it's fantastic. So you're not having to dry your filament. It keeps dust off it. Really cheap. And then the silica is really easy to recharge. You literally just put it in the microwave for, I think it's like 10 minutes on defrost. It goes from, you know, pink is fully saturated, and then back to blue. It's easy, and it's really cheap. I think it was like $16 for like 2 pounds of it. It works perfectly for filament. So yeah, that's kind of the two things. Just really, you know, buy a dryer, and then PLA you really don't need to store in a dry box. You can. I've had PLA that's sat out for almost 3 years, and no issue at all. No issue. Prints exactly the same as the day I opened it. But yeah, definitely for PETG and for ABS, definitely go and use a dryer and keep it in a dry box. So one thing I want to talk about is filament brands. And there's a lot of people who review stuff that don't tell you about a good filament brand. They're kind of like, oh, just going to buy what you want. I think it's dumb. Of course, a lot of them are sponsored by a certain filament brand, you know. And a lot of that is it'll be a more expensive brand that you really don't need for your project, right? I would say don't be afraid of buying cheaper filaments. Now, Polymaker is great. Polymaker does make really good stuff, and they have really good filament, you know, but their filament is expensive. You know, Overture, they make really good filament too. It's a little bit pricey. It's a little pricey, but not nearly anywhere near Polymaker, Voxel, or any of that stuff. If you're just printing projects, you don't need to sit there and buy expensive filament. One I really like that I've used for a long time, this is Elegoo. Elegoo makes really cheap filament, and it works really well. This is their PETG. You can get it on sale for $11 to $10 a kilogram, and it prints amazing. It prints perfectly, and it's cheap. You know, you don't need to be breaking the bank for filament. Sunlu is another one. This is pretty cheap. I think it's like 15 bucks. Granted, if you get certain, this is like a sky blue. It's like a matte sky blue, so it's gonna be more expensive. But if you're just getting regular PETG or PLA, you don't need to break the bank on it. What's printing right now is JO, and this is so JO is a subsidiary of Sunlu, and I got a 4. I think so. They roll their spools at, I think, 1,100 kilograms. So you get 100 plus grams with every spool. And I think it was $38 for 4 spools of filament. So $38 for 4.4 kilograms of filament, which is sub $10 per spool. And it prints fine. It prints absolutely fine. It prints great. And I think too, the market's changed a lot, because I think back in the day, it was like, yeah, you know, some of those really, really cheap, you know, $6 spools were not good at all. But I think anymore, all of these, especially a lot of the other brands, they all kind of come from the same factory, come from the same suppliers, and it really isn't a whole lot of difference. Like I said, JO is a subsidiary of Sunlu, and it's so cheap, and it prints fantastic. So I would say, you know, don't be afraid of cheap filament. You know, it's like, yeah, you can go buy Polymaker, but it's going to cost you a fortune. You know, if that's the way you want to go, cool. I would say Elegoo is a great place to start with. Like I said, you can get their black PETG for, if you find it on sale, it's maybe $10 to $11 for a kilogram. Almost every single supplier sells their filament way cheaper at bulk. So I would say go and try some filaments, try cheaper filament, and then kind of go from there. I know people have had good results with JO. I'm already liking JO. I just started using it, and it seems to print fantastic. I will say with the cheaper filament, you're probably gonna have to dry it. Shocker. You know, there's people that give back, oh, well, it seemed to have water in it. Yeah, it's $8 a spool. Yeah, go dry it. Cool. You should already own a dryer anyway. Like, as long as you're okay with drying it, it prints fantastic. I know people have used Kingroon, G-Tech. Those print wells too. Like I said, they probably all came from the same Chinese factory, whatever. But yeah, don't be afraid of expensive filament. Don't let people tell you that you can't buy sub $10 filament. It's not going to be good. You know, go out there, maybe buy a spool, see how it is, and if you like it, buy a couple more, and then if you really like it, go and buy in bulk and kind of go from there, and you're going to save yourself a lot of money. Now, yes, if you're doing a higher engineering project where you need like a filament filled, or you need something that's really strong, like like for instance, I just purchased a PET glass fiber from the Polymaker Fiber Online because it was on sale. and that's for a very specific project, yes, spend more money. But if you're just printing stuff, you don't need to spend a ton of money on filament. I hope that's kind of helped you. If you guys want to, I can do a more in-depth filament guide on like different filaments, but like I said, this was more just to cover your 3 basics of what you need to print stuff. So have a good day.